The Caribbean is often described as the most tourism-dependent region in the world. A titan is described as one that stands out for greatness of achievement, one who's influential in his field. Hi, I'm Marlene Stevenson-Daly. Welcome to our podcast. We call it Tourism Titans. It's about the movers and shakers of the industry, men and women who have contributed to its growth and development in Jamaica, the region, and indeed the world. And my special guest today is Ainsley Henriques, founder of the Jamaica Export Trading Company, which was founded to market Jamaican goods like limestone and garments and gypsum abroad.
And food.
And food. He sat on the World Spice Council, introduced, did you know this? Plummy tomatoes, or what they call plum tomatoes, to Jamaica, manufactured all the woodwork for the conference center downtown Kingston, and built the furniture for the first Sandals Hotel, and subsequently for a number of other hotels. He created the country's agri-parks system and served multiple terms as head of the National Heritage Trust. Ainsley Henriques, welcome.
Thank you.
It is
pleasure.
so good to have you. Good to have you. Good to have you. Now, there's so many things we can talk about today, but one of the areas that I want to focus on is the fact that tourism is not just hotels and attractions. There are so many other facets to tourism. And you have made contributions in many of these other areas outside of the hotel, yeah? But I want you to start at the beginning. Before we actually started recording, you mentioned that you're from the bushes of St. Thomas. Welcome, and take us a little bit back to those bushes. You were born in St. Thomas?
Yes, I was born in St. Thomas. I was born at a place called Stanton, and I subsequently have discovered why Stanton got its name. And there are names in Kingston for the name Stanton, all based on the same background. Colonel Edward Stanton came with pen and venables at the English to capture Jamaica in 1655 from the Spanish. And he was granted a large piece of land in St. Thomas. Mm-hmm. And somewhere along the line, it became part of our piece of land that my family owned. So I was born at Stanton.
And then you have Stanton Terrace in Kingston.
Which was named after Stanton. And it was named by, and I know the story of its being named, it was then named by the Custos of Kingston, Sir George Seymour, and he named it after the name that my grandaunt gave to the property that she created on Seymour Avenue, so that my mother could become one of the first girls to attend St. Andrew High School.
So St. Andrew High School is coming out of that history of the Stanton property.
Not really, no. Stanton High, the high school really was created separately, but my grand aunt and grandmother decided that their daughter, I use the word daughter because
yes.
I grew up with three mothers. Their daughter would attend St. Andrew High School. So they had to move her to Kingston because there was no bus system in those days. They were traveling by horse and buggy.
Oh, boy. That was a long time ago.
And that's how the name Stanton Terrace came up. And my grandaunt is supposed to have said to Sir Seymour, it's a mistake that you've made. He said, no, it's not. It's an honor to name that street after your property.
Indeed, I think it was.
These are stories that I have by the dozens. So,
yes.
you know.
So we want to hear some of those stories in our podcast today, because I know you're very passionate about the history of Jamaica, and perhaps not as many persons, I believe, not as many people are as aware as we should be, and I think we take a lot of things for granted.
I don't think we have been given the opportunity generally and widely to understand who we really are. We are a migrant community. Our indigenous people, or Taino, which we used to call Arawaks, have literally been all died out.
Yes.
And there's very little evidence that there's anybody today who have Taino DNA left in them.
Right.
That's part of the problem that the Spanish created, in a sense, by bringing European diseases into the Taino, and at the same time working these people in a way that they were not accustomed to, because they lived a very perfect life in a sense, and an amazing set of people when you look at their history. So that's another story. So all of us, whether we are descendants of the Spanish, and there are not very many that were left in Jamaica at the time of the English capture of Jamaica, and all of the other aspects of our history, because we became a place where, apart from being dragged here, most of us were shoved here. So the whole point is that we're really not a set of people that came to discover gold and silver, for the very simple reason we have no gold and silver. So we were either dragged or shoved. But the dragging was, of course, based on the fact that the English discovered that we could grow excellent sugar cane, and they were able, as a result of that, to be able to produce sugar. And sugar was not a commodity that was known in Europe. They knew what honey was, but they didn't have sugar. So the part of the expansion of the Western Hemisphere was based on the fact that the Europeans wanted sugar.
And this would have been a novelty,
And,
so
so
that market would have just blossomed for it.
There wasn't anybody here, so they went and found themselves to buy and capture people from Africa to become enslaved. And as a result of all of that, the opportunities were created when people were not allowed to practice, in a sense. One aspect of it was Judaism in Europe. They fled and were allowed to settle in Jamaica. And it was only in 1831 that the Jews were, in fact, allowed to become British citizens. So it's a whole other story of a history, which starts, if you really want to know, in a sense, as a free people 184 years ago.
I was about to say that we have been told, and I believe it is so, that Jews would have been in Jamaica almost 200 years.
No. The story of a Jewish settlement in Jamaica, or being shoved here from wherever it was, goes back much further. It goes back to the 1650s. With the English capture. The Spanish did
from
not
Penn and Venables.
Yeah, the Spanish did not allow Jews to settle in Jamaica. They expelled them from Spain in 1492. So if I have any Jewish ancestors that came out of Spain, they would have been kicked out in 1492 or had become Catholic practitioners. And some of them ended up in Portugal, and they got kicked out of Portugal as well. So they ended up after 1580, 1590 in Amsterdam. And then the first Jewish settlement in the Caribbean in the Western Hemisphere was, in fact, in Curacao.
Okay. So if you can take us back...
That's a story by itself.
If you can take us back to the time of the settlement of Jews in Jamaica, because now we're talking heritage tourism, yes? And how all of who we are or who we have become from all that history and all the different influences, this is part of what makes us unique, and this is part of what we have to share with the world in terms of our heritage. Well, so when was the first Jewish
settlement in Jamaica was in 1656, about a year after Penn and Venables captured Jamaica. And the first synagogue in Jamaica was built in the 1660s and was destroyed. It's underwater as a result of the earthquake of 1692.
Okay.
So, yes, we've been here a long time. Spanish Town in the early 1700s, because of the way that Jamaica was being managed, became a large Jewish settlement. In fact, possibly largest Jewish settlement in the Western Hemisphere. So that's another argument. And part of my pleasure is to have been interested enough in all of our Jewish history to talk about it around the world. In fact, I should have given a major speech last week in Philadelphia, but thank goodness I said I've had enough. So enough is enough.
But the truth is we can learn so much from you. You have taken the time to research it. And you have the history from your own ancestry.
Well, that's part of the story. I mean, part of the story is not just my ancestry. Part of my story is that if you look around the country today with hundreds of Henriqueses, for example, or other family members or other elements of family that I descend from. Yes, we are a large settlement, because if you look at the generations that come down from the capture from emancipation, you're looking at 7 generations. If you're looking at the amount of generations that come down from 1660s, you're looking at a whole lot more generations, 15, 16, 17 generations. So, if you do that and you recognize the fact that most people have had 2, 3, 4, 5 children, that's a small amount, because I come from generations where there were 13 and 14 children in a family.
In each family?
Yes, in a family.
Wow.
My grandmother from Malvern was one of 13, etc., etc.,
Yes. The recreation,
right?
perhaps
My
at
mother
that
was
time
the
was a little
exception.
limited, so that would have been part of the recreation.
It's part of the story, and many of our families in Jamaica have had multiple children, and that's even with the legitimate wife. But then what about the
I
illegitimate
have 16
wife?
siblings, so I can relate.
Yes, so that's not a problem for most of us, okay?
I
And
can
it's part
relate.
of the reality of what humanity is. And I go one step further to get the Jewish story out of the way, in a sense, is that we probably have 300,000 to 400,000 Jamaicans with a Jewish ancestry.
What are some of the names so that people can even make a connection? You said Henriques, well, what are some of the other names?
Well, now
That are typical.
We're looking at people who've come with names from other parts of the world, and those family names would be like mostly the Spanish and Portuguese names. Henriques de Lissa.
De Lissa, yes.
De Lissa actually didn't come from Spain and Portugal; they came from Europe. But it's a part of the story. Delgado, I could just go on and on and on. It's just. But the other set of names, actually, of course, are basically English, because we didn't bring in and we're not using any of our African names to any real extent. So it is largely those who came with names from somewhere else or were given names. One of my famous stories, supposedly famous stories, is I picked up a gentleman of Indian ethnicity in Port Royal many years ago, and we were driving to Harbourview. And we introduced ourselves, and his name was Baker. And I said, "Oh, you come from York and St. Thomas." I don't know the man, And I know why I said so. Because when Indians, ethnicities, people came here as indentured labor, they took the English names of where they were working. And Mr. Baker, I was absolutely correct. Mr. Baker came to work at Belvedere with the Baker family, and I don't know if you know who the Baker family was. The Baker family were the first people to ship bananas out to Jamaica in 1868.
Yes.
So there you have it. So all of a sudden, this man sort of didn't jump out of the car, but we became friends.
Yes.
Because I knew something of his history, because I knew the Baker family. I was old enough to have known the Baker family, the descendants of the baker of banana fame.
Yes. All right. Well, tell us a little bit about. If, for example, I were to come as a visitor, we know that people who come for the heritage of a country, they typically stay longer. The research is there which shows that they typically spend a little bit more, and they want to experience your culture. They want to walk the streets that you walk. They want to talk the talk that you talk, eat what you eat. They want to really immerse themselves in a country. So I'm in Kingston, and I'd like to look at some of the things that would remind us of our Jewish heritage. Where would you take us?
Oh, no, the Jewish heritage of Jamaica is very simple. That is a synagogue on Duke Street. It was built after the fire of 1882. You've heard of the fire of London in 1666, but
Yes.
nobody's ever told you about the fire of Kingston in 1882. So that's
No.
part of our problem. It burnt down a whole lot of Kingston. That's one of the historic aspects of it, but we don't write about it because we read about the English history,
Yes.
not on the Jamaican history. So we have to go back to Roy Auger and others to say, hey, we have a history too of
Yes,
fire.
yes.
That's another story. And so I think 3 synagogues burnt down, and a lot of the records disappeared because of the fire. So after the 1882 synagogue, the synagogue on Duke Street was built in 1887, and still where we celebrate. There was a magnificent synagogue built in Spanish Town in 1705, after the earthquake of 1692. And that synagogue was the final end of it was in 1907 with the earthquake of Jamaica in Jamaica. But it's still there, and I know it's still there because I've used my various talents, not skills, talents, to organize the archaeological work that shows where it is, and it's on Spanish Town, Monk Street on Spanish Town. And so not only that, there's a cemetery behind it as well, which is on Adelaide Street that goes down to the river. So part of that story is, and we've not been able to find what is known as a mikveh, a place for women bathe before they go to services. So we figured out that there must have been a bathing house on the Rio Cobre.
Ah.
So that's part of another story of interpretation of what a history can be.
Yes.
But really the fascinating one was that we started about 15 years ago, was a synagogue, was a cemetery at behind Deno and Geddes. And that was a cemetery which was created by the people who started to settle in Port Royal. Because the Port Royal water table is so high that you can't put graves in there easily. So they started this particular cemetery, and we have graves that have been identified with grave markers going back to 1672.
Wow.
So if you know anybody with the name Gabe, that is the time when their family started to settle in Port Royal and die.
Gabe.
Okay.
Okay.
So that's another.
How many cemeteries do we have? Jewish cemeteries do we have in Jamaica?
At one stage we counted 21, but a number of them were very small.
Right.
Because
there is one in Montego Bay on what is now called the Jimmy Cliff Boulevard.
Two in Montego Bay, actually.
Okay. Where's the other? Where's the other one?
Lucy,
and there's one in Falmouth.
And there's one in Lucy, and there's one in St. Anne's Bay, and there's one in Clarendon. And there's still one there were 3 in Spanish Town. And, I could go on and on and on.
Yes,
Part of my problem was to make sure I remember what I'm talking about.
Our guest on Tourism Titans today is Ainsley Henriques. He's taking us back in time and sharing the history of it all with us here on the program. Soon come.
In tourism, the people are the product. Yes, they are one of our industry's most important assets. They help create memorable lifetime experiences. They, through their service, make the difference. We share the stories of their challenges and triumphs, of what makes them tick, of who they really are, just to inspire you to act positively. You too can be an ambassador for tourism and our country and become a Jamaican tourism titan. Start today.
You're listening to Tourism Titans, and my special guest is Ainsley Henriques. He is a man who wears many, many hats, including that of Honorary Consul of Israel in Jamaica. And I know he's had much experience, a lot of experience with all kinds of people. And he is a student of life. And I'm so delighted to have him. You were saying to me just when we took the break, that you're quarter Ukrainian. Can you sort of rewind and tell me?
The story is very simple. My grandfather left Morant Bay. My great-grandfather was a shopkeeper in Morant Bay. Okay, and I can still walking through the town of Morant Bay and recognize family. Put it bluntly. I won't go into any more detail. Because my great-grandfather was also a descendant of others that came and lived in Morant Bay. And so he went to America to look for a job. I don't think he and his father got on very well. And he went to dinner with a Jamaican who had migrated, and that was probably just after the earthquake of 1907, because people left at that time. Mm-hmm. And anyway, he ran into this, he was at dinner. He met a little tiny lady who spoke English, but was from the Ukraine, and Orthodox Jewish. Jewess, and he decided that he fell in love with her, told her he was going to marry her. And she said, "You must be crazy. First of all, you're not an Orthodox Jew, and second of all, where's Jamaica?" Anyway, the bottom line is eventually persuaded her to come to Jamaica. They got married in Philadelphia, and then he went back to settle other issues in America shortly after, and then died of the Spanish flu. So I was left, or my mother was left with her aunt and her mother, and they became my three mothers.
Oh, triple whammy. You know, one of the interesting things I saw when I tried to get some information about you was that you introduced plum tomatoes to Jamaica?
Yes, I did agriculture. I studied agriculture.
Okay.
And I once teased my mother that she owed me a lot of money.
How
She
so?
said, "Why? I never borrowed any from you." She said, I said, "No, but I never had to pay any school fees."
That's interesting.
Including
You took-
university.
you took care
including
of
university.
all
You
of the
see,
costs.
At my day was such that most people and most men, young men, didn't want to do agriculture or woodwork. I ended up doing both.
Ah, and as you talk about the woodwork, I believe you were responsible for building the furniture for the first Sandals Hotel, which would be the old Bay Rock Hotel, now Sandals Montego Bay.
Correct.
Tell me about that.
Well, what happened to me was that after I had spent 6 or 7 years in agriculture in Morant Bay, and I was married and had 3 daughters, I was married to a woman that had developed cancer, breast cancer. Her name was Sheila Chung. She was Miss Jamaica 1959,
All right.
and she was the first Miss Jamaica to enter Miss World. And I was at university, and I discovered that she was, in the English press, one of the favorites to win the Miss World title.
All right.
And when I came back to Jamaica, she was selling motor cars. And so the place where I first got my first job was about 6 months later, decided we needed a truck, and this woman walked into the office. And I said, "Oh my God," and I turned around to the person behind me. This is a whole story by itself. And I said, "Who is that?" She said, "That's Miss Jamaica, last year's Miss Jamaica." So ended up that I ended up being the person from the company that was negotiating the purchase of the truck.
The truck.
And I always used to tease my wife that if I hadn't been responsible for buying a truck, she
you
would
would not
never
have
have married me. So that's my story. And that story in itself is a long story, because she developed breast cancer and she died 9 years later. And that's why I had to come to Kingston, because in that time of our lives, the opportunity to have radiation and radiotherapy and chemotherapy wasn't something that the Morant Bay Princess Margaret Hall
Could offer at the time.
So that was my story, and as a result of that, one of the things that I was able to do was to lease the Mayfair Furniture Factory from the Hanna family.
Ah, so that's
Eventually,
how
and that's how I got
furniture
into
making
furniture business. Yeah.
started.
I didn't own it, I leased it, and thought that I could manage the manufacture of furniture, and I didn't do too badly for 25 years.
25 years is a long time for any business to be going. But you were using what, mahogany, cedar?
Anything that anybody wanted, yes. We made furniture. We were what is called a bespoke furniture manufacturer.
So how did that contract come about for Sandals? Is it that
Butch
said
me.
to you,
He called
"Listen,
me.
I'm building a hotel.
No,
we need furniture."
We bought the hotel, and he didn't have enough furniture in it, or it hadn't been maintained, and he wanted to do a new line of furniture. And I did whatever Butch wanted at that time. But the one fascinating thing was that the truck that I used to carry the furniture down twice crashed. And I spent the whole of Christmas and New Year's fixing furniture in Montego Bay.
That had been broken from the accident. Oh, my goodness.
But I've had some very interesting furniture experiences, yeah.
You actually served as head of the National Heritage Trust. And clearly your passion for history would have served you very well in that capacity. What achievements from that part of your journey would you say have really, really, for you, stood out?
Well, first, one of the very interesting things was that the country owned a place called Seville. And Seville was actually where I first ran into the understanding that Columbus lived at Seville.
Yes.
And we were working on to find the two Columbus vessels of the 1403 voyage, 1503 voyage, that were marooned in Seville in St. Anne Harbour. And the captain and my head is gone. As a result of that, we also had people, archaeologists, doing some work up behind the house at Seville. And that was where the enslaved village was.
Yes.
So we got an understanding of Seville both from the sea and from the slave village and from the idea that this was an English plantation. And what was even more interesting is that we just had found that it had been actually captured, and a man was running it as an old people's home. So the answer was...
So what we now have is a Seville Great House.
Yes, the Seville Great House was an old people's home. So the end of that story was that I removed the old people's home.
Yes.
We created a museum inside the house, and all things went from one step to another, including the fact that we found graves and remains of 4 people.
Yes.
And the famous story that I'm very proud of having done, if it's of any emotional value, was to return 2 of those remains to Ghana, and it is what I call the return of the Middle Passage.
Yes. I recall.
Yes, and I think it's just remarkable and wonderful that we were able to do that with, and the program that is that you heard at Seville on the before independence that they had.
Yes.
Is what we one of the things we started, because it's a major cultural experience and activity, and I go one step further with regards to Seville. We've done subsequent work at Seville to find a Spanish sugar mill that belonged to Garay are you ready? Of 1517. And it has been excavated and it is there. It's the oldest sugar mill in the Western Hemisphere.
Wow.
And we've done nothing about recognizing the value of that story to any visitor that comes to Jamaica, even if they only give them a teaspoon of brown sugar.
Wow.
Because it is where, not only where Garay built his sugar mill,
yes,
but it's where also Columbus lived up on top of the hill before he sent the voyage of the last canoe to Hispaniola to get the people off. I have those stories inside my stomach, inside my head, and in my fingernails. No, you can't
keep it in your stomach and in your fingernails. You have to write it down.
It's part of our history. It's an amazing history.
Yes, but we have to capture the history. Our oral tradition is not going to serve us into the future. And these are things that distinguish who we are as a people, as a destination. And when we talk about heritage tourism, these are all the built and tangible things that set us apart.
Well, let me be a little naughty and say that part of the problem is that we have spent an inordinate amount of time understanding enslavement. And that's nothing wrong with that. But we have not spent anything compensating to the understanding of what we have done since emancipation. Mm-hmm. There's one other discipline that I have, or one other activity.
Another hat that you wear.
That I wear. And it happened about 33 years ago. I was a friend of a man who was the Prime Minister of Jamaica. A lot of people liked him and a lot of people didn't like him. His name was Michael Manley. And he said to me one day, "Ainsley, you're going to become chairman of the Norman Manley Foundation." And I have been for 33 years. And one of the things that I've been privileged to be able to achieve is Norman Manley's last home is now a national monument, and we're opening an emancipation to independence celebration of the life of the Manleys from his great-grandfather, his great-grandfather and his grandmother, who were enslaved in St. Elizabeth, to the present time when he was the architect of our new independent country.
There's so much history all around us, all around us.
It's fabulous.
And if only sometimes we take the time to tell the stories. And I really want to say to you, Ainsley, it cannot be in your heart or in your fingertips or in your head. It needs to be all put down on paper so that my young friend here, Oshin, can pick it up. And we can use different modalities to share that information, but the stories have to be told.
Well, if I take it to Stony Gut, right? I'm probably the only person that can take a group there and have them in tears looking at Paul Bogle's churchyard.
Wow. I should do one of your tours. I know you have
that to me is one of the most exciting and most important history stories of our country. To have died to create social justice is incredible.
It is. And when I think about it...
And that's where I come from, just below Stony Gut.
Yes. When I think about it, there's so many stories that need to be told that we don't hear it. And it's also part of the education system that we inherited, because we would have all the stories of Christopher Columbus and Sir Walter Raleigh and whoever else, but we never really got the stories.
Well, I went to a boarding school.
Of those who were here.
I went to a boarding school. I think the name of it is Jamaica College.
Jamaica College.
And that's a story by itself. And as a result of the Jamaica College experience and trying to learn history, I had no interest in English history. I gave it up in third form under the E.H.J. King lecture. So now to tell me that I'm a historian is simply because I gave up the wrong history and I'm now reading the right history.
Ainsley Henriques, it has been a treat. I just want to say finally, your own perspective on heritage tourism as far as Jamaica is concerned. What are we? Where do we need to go? How do you see the future for this aspect of our tourism product?
At one stage of our tourist development program, we had a concept where people could come and stay in people's homes.
Yes.
And I don't know, what's the name of it again?
The homestay program.
Mm-hmm. And I thought it was one of the most important programs that we could have created, because it allowed people to meet and mingle with us and understand our history and share it when they go home.
Yes.
Because that's part of the problem. You can't easily advertise a program of sharing my history. That's not how it works. You have people that will share their history with you, and then you can share that experience with others. Because it's not something that you look at. It's not something that you taste. It's not something you listen to. It's all part of a whole program. And we aren't doing enough of that, in my view. I'm going to be naughty again. I'm a naughty person sometimes. And quite honestly, part of the naughtiness is that, putting up people in a hotel and not giving any of their experiences to share our knowledge and our program with them is almost like asking our people to continue to serve as enslaved people.
That is being naughty. But I hear you.
But no, I agree we have to earn a living. But
Yes.
the point is that I think that we are not taking enough time to be able to share where each of us have come from and each of us have experienced to know what our last basically 400 years of stories
all
are.
about. Yes. Ainsley Henriques, you've given us some food for thought, and I think that's also very important. And as we come out of this period of a pandemic, you lost your grandfather great-grandfather to
a
the
long
Spanish
time ago,
flu.
long
That
time.
was a long time ago, but I don't think we've seen anything. I've heard persons likening this COVID-19 pandemic to the many, many lives that were lost in the Spanish flu. But there were far more, but we haven't seen anything quite like this.
Well, he ended up in Philadelphia, and
In a-
50%
in a
of the
while.
Philadelphia population died. So we're anything like
Yes,
that.
nothing
But
like
we
that.
don't. We want to prevent any death. So that's another story.
Yes, yes. But very important that we consider our history and consider exactly what makes us who we are and how do we share who we are with the folks who we invite to Jamaica as a destination, so that when they go, it's deeper. It's a deeper experience that they have, and they can also share those stories in turn.
I thank you, because I just want us to also understand that we need to all be able to share our history with our people, and in particular our younger people.
Yes.
But today I can comment on the fact that the years then when I was younger and the years that I experience today, there's a tremendous positive change in all our attitudes to whom we are as a people. So we have changed positively, but I think we still need to know more about from whence we came.
Yes. Thank you so much for being my special guest today. It has been really, really nice having you. I have learned in the process, and you have piqued my interest even more. As I was saying just recently, we unveiled a life-sized statue of Sir Alexander, the Right Excellent Sir Alexander Bustamante. And for me, it was a proud moment. And I believe even though we've had some criticism, but I think for the majority of us, it is a relic, something that reminds us of our past, of our history, and that it's important for us to understand. So,
But let me boast and tell you now that the restoration of Tucker Avenue, Buster's home, under the authority of the appropriate work of Sir Ainsley Henriques, was the person that raised the money to do it. Well, you're looking at him. I'm putting it simply to tell you that when it comes to our history and our heritage, politics does not play a role in my life. And I'll go further and I'll tell you that the first time that Blenheim, Buster's birthplace, was restored was under my direction. And I traveled to it with Lady B. And we had P.J. Patterson give the speech. And why? Because P.J.'s grandfather was the headmaster of the school that Buster attended.
it's
So,
such an interesting
This is part of the story.
mix of all kinds of
So
things.
one
But
of
if
the
you don't know, you don't know.
Okay. So, and my role to be able to have been able to acquire for the people of Jamaica, Norman Manley's last home is not mine. It belongs to the National Heritage Trust.
Roxborough.
No. Regardless, Roxborough existed as a national monument before my time.
Okay, so now we're talking about
No, I'm talking about regardless on
Regardless.
Washington Drive opposite Mega Mart.
Okay. Very interesting. Thank you so much for being my guest. It has been my pleasure, and I've run out of time, but
Well, I understand that,
Yes.
but when it comes to my talking, time is a really serious problem.
not to worry. There's so many nuggets and so many things to pique our interest. Thank you so much for listening to Tourism Titans. We welcome your feedback at letusknow@tpdco.org. Leave us a comment, share, like, and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at TPDCOJA. I'm Marlene Stevenson Daly. See you soon.